The Bagman Story. One winter's evening, about 5 o'clock, just as it began to grow dusk, a man in a gig might have been seen urging his tired horse along the road which leads across Marlborough Downs in the direction of Bristol. I say he might have been seen, and I have no doubt he would have been, if anybody but a blind man had happened to pass that way, but the weather was so bad, and the night so cold and wet, that nothing was out but the water, and so the traveller jogged along in the middle of the road, lonesome and dreary enough. If any bagman of that day could have caught sight of the little neck-or-nothing sort of gig, with clay-coloured body and red wheels, and the vixenish, ill-tempered, fast-going bay mare that looked like a cross between a butcher's horse and a twopenny post-office pony, he would have known at once that this traveller could have been no other than Tom Smart of the great house of Bilson and Slum, Catteaton Street, City. However, as there was no bagman to look on, nobody knew anything at all about the matter. And so Tom Smart and his clay-coloured gig with the red wheels and the vixenish mare with the fast pace went on together, keeping the secret among them, and nobody was a bit the wiser. There are many pleasanter places even in this dreary world than Marlborough Downs when it blows hard, and if you throw in beside a gloomy winter's evening, a miry and sloppy road, and a pelting fall of heavy rain, and try the effect, by way of experiment, in your own proper person, you will experience the full force of this observation. The wind blew not up the road or down it, though that's bad enough, but sheer across it, sending the rain slanting down like the lines they used to rule in the copybooks at school to make the boys slope well. For a moment it would die away, and the traveller would begin to delude himself into the belief that, exhausted with its previous fury, it had quietly laid itself down to rest, when, whoo, he would hear it growling and whistling in the distance, and on it would come, rushing over the hilltops and sweeping along the plain, gathering sound and strength as it drew nearer, until it dashed with a heavy gust against horse and man, driving the sharp rain into their ears, and its cold, damp breath into their very bones. And past them it would scour, far, far away, with a stunning roar, as if in ridicule of their weakness, and triumphant in the consciousness of its own strength and power. The bay mare splashed away through the mud and water with drooping ears, now and then tossing her head as if to express her disgust at this very ungentlemanly behaviour of the elements, but keeping a good pace notwithstanding, until a gust of wind more furious than any that had yet assailed them caused her to stop suddenly and plant her 4 feet firmly against the ground to prevent her being blown over. It's a special mercy that she did this, for if she had been blown over, the vixenish mare was so light, and the gig was so light, and Tom Smart such a lightweight into the bargain, that they must infallibly have all gone rolling over and over together until they reached the confines of earth, or until the wind fell. And in either case, the probability is that neither the vixenish mare, nor the clay-coloured gig with the red wheels, nor Tom Smart would ever have been fit for service again. "Well, damn my straps and whiskers," says Tom Smart. Tom sometimes had an unpleasant knack of swearing. "Damn my straps and whiskers," says Tom, "if this ain't pleasant, blow me." You'll very likely ask me why, as Tom Smart had been pretty well blown already, he expressed this wish to be submitted to the same process again. I can't say. All I know is that Tom Smart said so, or at least he always told my uncle he said so, and it's just the same thing. "Blow me," says Tom Smart, and the mare neighed as if she were precisely of the same opinion. "Cheer up, old girl," said Tom, patting the bay on the neck with the end of his whip. "It won't do pushing on such a night as this. The first house we come to, we'll put up at, so the faster you go, the sooner it's over. So-ho, old girl, gently, gently." Whether the vixenish mare was sufficiently well acquainted with the tones of Tom's voice to comprehend his meaning, or whether she found it colder standing still than moving on, of course I can't say. But I can say that Tom had no sooner finished speaking than she pricked up her ears and started forward at a speed which made the clay-coloured gig rattle till you would have supposed every one of the red spokes were going to fly out on the turf of Marlborough Downs. And even Tom, whip as he was, couldn't stop or check her pace until she drew up of her own accord before a roadside inn on the right-hand side of the way, about 1/4 of a mile from the end of the downs. Tom cast a hasty glance at the upper part of the house as he threw the reins to the hostler and stuck the whip in the box. It was a strange old place, built of a kind of shingle, inlaid, as it were, with crossbeams, with gable-topped windows projecting completely over the pathway, and a low door with a dark porch and a couple of steep steps leading down into the house, instead of the modern fashion of half a dozen ones leading up to it. It was a comfortable-looking place, though, for there was a strong, cheerful light in the bar window, which shed a bright ray across the road, and even lighted up the hedges on the other side. And there was a red flickering light in the opposite window, one moment but faintly discernible, and the next gleaming strongly through the drawn curtains, which intimated that a rousing fire was blazing within. Marking these little evidences with the eye of an experienced traveller, Tom dismounted with as much agility as his half-frozen limbs would permit, and entered the house. In less than 5 minutes' time, Tom was ensconced in the room opposite the bar, the very room where he had imagined the fire blazing, before a substantial, matter-of-fact, roaring fire, composed of something short of a bushel of coals, and wood enough to make half a dozen decent gooseberry bushes piled halfway up the chimney, and roaring and crackling with a sound that of itself would have warmed the heart of any reasonable man. This was comfortable, but this was not all. For a smartly dressed girl with a bright eye and a neat ankle was laying a very clean white cloth on the table. And as Tom sat with his slippered feet on the fender and his back to the open door, he saw a charming prospect of the bar reflected in the glass over the chimney-piece, with delightful rows of green bottles and gold labels, together with jars of pickles and preserves, and cheeses and boiled hams, and rounds of beef arranged on shelves in the most tempting and delicious array. Well, this was comfortable too, but even this was not all. For in the bar, seated at tea at the nicest possible little table, drawn close up before the brightest possible little fire, was a buxom widow of somewhere about 48 or thereabouts, with a face as comfortable as the bar, who was evidently the landlady of the house and the supreme ruler over all these agreeable possessions. There was only one drawback to the beauty of the whole picture, and that was a tall man, a very tall man, in a brown coat and bright basket buttons and black whiskers and wavy black hair, who was seated at tea with the widow, and who it required no great penetration to discover was in a fair way of persuading her to be a widow no longer, but to confer upon him the privilege of sitting down in that bar for and during the whole remainder of the term of his natural life. Tom Smart was by no means of an irritable or envious disposition, but somehow or other the tall man with the brown coat and the bright basket buttons did rouse what little gall he had in his composition, and did make him feel extremely indignant. The more especially as he could now and then observe from his seat before the glass certain little affectionate familiarities passing between the tall man and the widow, which sufficiently denoted that the tall man was as high in favour as he was in size. Tom was fond of hot punch. I may venture to say he was very fond of hot punch. And after he had seen the vixenish mare well fed and well littered down, and had eaten every bit of the nice little hot dinner which the widow tossed up for him with her own hands, he just ordered a tumbler of it by way of experiment. Now, if there was one thing in the whole range of domestic art which the widow could manufacture better than another, it was this identical article. And the first tumbler was adapted to Tom Smart's taste with such peculiar nicety that he ordered a second with the least possible delay. Hot punch is a pleasant thing, gentlemen, an extremely pleasant thing under any circumstances, but in that snug old parlour, before the roaring fire, with the wind blowing outside till every timber in the old house creaked again, Tom Smart found it perfectly delightful. He ordered another tumbler, and then another. I'm not quite certain whether he didn't order another after that. But the more he drank of the hot punch, the more he thought of the tall man. "Confound his impudence," said Tom to himself. "What business has he in that snug bar? Such an ugly villain, too," said Tom. "If the widow had any taste, she might surely pick up some better fellow than that." Here Tom's eye wandered from the glass on the chimney-piece to the glass on the table, and as he felt himself becoming gradually sentimental, he emptied the fourth tumbler of punch and ordered a fifth. Tom Smart, gentlemen, had always been very much attached to the public line. It had long been his ambition to stand in a bar of his own, in a green coat, knee-cords and tops. He had a great notion of taking the chair at convivial dinners, and he had often thought how well he could preside in a room of his own in the talking way, and what a capital example he could set to his customers in the drinking department.